Okay, so hi, welcome back, guys, to Law of Attraction. Today, I wanted to show you something that I have created, and it's in this book that I've written called The Gatekeeper of Your Mind. Now, I'm in the process at the moment of recording and editing a podcast version of this, and that's going to be uploaded as part of my subscription service, and I'm going to be releasing in chapters. So if you want to listen to the audio version, you're not sick of hearing me talk, then you will be able to find that via the subscription service, and it is only $2.99 a month, and you'll be able to hear the whole book that I have written. And this is kind of like a bit of a life's culmination of all the things that I have worked out and thought of. So let's have a little look at The Gatekeeper of Your Mind. This is the beautiful book, but I wanted to show you something very, very specific in this, okay? So I was having a meeting with a client this morning. We were talking about how capitalism and the world at large triggers us in quite a significant way to stop us being empowered. And so I wanted to show you something that I'd created based off of my sense of awareness and some of the kind of downloads that I've gotten from spirit and some of the kind of information that I have kind of come to my own sort of conclusion. And this is this wonderful little table that I'm going to show you in a second once I can find it. Now, this book talks all about the caveman in your mind. It talks about capitalism. It talks about, all sorts of things. So you'll probably enjoy this if you enjoy my work. And basically, I wanted to kind of create this book so that you would just you'd just be able to read this book and it would be something that would be kind of easier for us to deal with. So this is mine. This is copyrighted. I don't mind you guys if you share it, as long as you tag me in it. This is my life's work. So I wanted to talk to you today about how our present society uses your caveman in your mind, that is your natural primordial senses and urges, and they use those urges as a way of controlling your behavior by creating a problem, a reaction, and a solution. And it's crafty. It's crafty. So let's have a little look at this. And this is kind of the construct that I like to call the matrix. So the matrix is, the word matrix comes from mother, okay? And we have two mothers. We have the Mother Earth that we were all originally connected to, which is the original mother. And then we have the false mother that we're all connected to. Now, this false mother is the matrix that I talk about, that I am attempting to disconnect from and that I am attempting you to disconnect from. And the way that we disconnect from this is to become consciously aware of it. That's all we need to do. Be consciously aware of it. And once you're consciously aware of it, you're not getting triggered left, right, and center by these problems that are created in our society to stimulate a reaction in you. And what we just saw over the last kind of couple of years with the pandemic, for instance, the amount of fear that was being triggered. And the reason why fear is used is because it gets you into this primordial urge and your IQ goes down. You don't sit in your higher functioning, okay? Within your brain, you have certain parts of your brain. You have the prefrontal cortex, which is at the front of your skull here. And this is for some of those higher order tasks, higher levels of thinking, about prospective memory. If I do this, this will happen. About judgment of whether or not something's a good idea. This is what the prefrontal cortex is for. And when we are triggered, we go down into the back of our brains. This is called the basal ganglia. It's the root of your brain, and it's one of the oldest parts of your brain. And this is like that reptilian brain that you sometimes hear about, the primordial, the chimp in your brain, whatever you like to call it. I like to call him the caveman. Mine's a guy. Yours can be a girl. Yours can be whatever you want it to be. It could be a chimpanzee if you like. But essentially, this is a part of ourselves that is aware, but is not as aware or as higher functioning as this part of our brain. And so it's very reactionary. And what I find within society that I've just noticed through observation, and I'm happy for people to say that this is wrong, but this is something I've noticed through observation and through my years of psychology study and my own sort of journey to awakening, as it were. These are some of the things that I've begun to notice, and I managed to write it out into this table that kind of came out really well, I think, not to toot my own horn. So we have 4 primordial senses, and these are nationally recognized things through sort of psychology and human behavior and anthropology. The first one is fear. The second one is feed. The the third is fornication, and the fourth is flee. And these are some of those primordial parts of ourselves that are deeply rooted in our senses of selves as part of that human condition that we're always fighting. And these in anthropology and psychology are called the 4Fs, okay? And they are the primordial senses that all human beings go through because of they are pertinent to our survival. And so these have become so strong and dominant in all of us, that's left us, being at the whim and will of this a little bit. And something that I do with my clients is that we call out, we begin to recognize that there's a part of ourselves that Carl Jung may call the shadow a little bit, but also recognizing that there's a part of ourselves that is working often to the antithesis of what we would want to do. And so this is a little bit like road rage, where you're frightened that you're going to get hit, then you get an angry reaction. And you'll probably behave in a way that you would never behave if it hadn't have been that you've been triggered by a road rage situation. You're into a road rage situation. And the reason is why it triggers that fear. The problem is that somebody's just cut you up. And so the reaction is like violence, is aggression. And a lot of us, when we're triggered to be in our basal ganglia, into the base part of your brain, we are like the worst forms of ourselves, because this is where people go really back into that kind of old chimp behavior. So let's have a little look at how kind of capitalism and consumerism, I feel, has used these things against us. And it's a way of making you buy things, making you be subservient, making you do things, making you behave in certain ways. Because when you're aware of the primordial senses that all human beings are going through, and all human beings have, then you can create a problem that will create a reaction, okay? And then what happens is that capitalism, from my perspective of what I can see, is that it comes in to offer you a solution to soothe the thing that they've just triggered in you. And so it's like one of the most perfect ways of keeping a person, a client, forever, because you are the poison and you are the cure. And I think that most things in the matrix is that they are the poison, they are the cure. So, for instance, eating food that the matrix would push towards you, as opposed to what Mother Nature would push to you, this creates sickness in the body, and then they sell you pharmaceuticals as a way of healing you. You don't see a doctor talk to their patients very much about their diets, or about their light, or about their stress levels, or about their exercise, how they're looking after their body, what is it that you're eating. They wouldn't advise you to kind of come off of all of these things before you get diabetes type 2. But once you've got diabetes type 2, they'll be very happy to give you the medication for that. And even then, recently I put up a post about how sugar is one of the biggest causes of Alzheimer's. And I had somebody just completely destroy me because they felt like it was untrue. But that was only because they're so trapped into the poison and the cure of the matrix, is that they don't think that there could be any other cure, because that isn't the reality that they're living in. And this is because most people have become so disenfranchised as a result of living in the matrix, which basically just pushes on all of us to be disempowered, because the disempowerment is the linchpin of the whole system. Okay, so for instance, beauty products, you have to hate yourself in some way, shape, or form to buy in to fashion, beauty, makeup, all of those kind of industries. And this is why they have another industry of magazines and things like that, where they're pushing images to you. You'll notice that they are always the poison and they are always the cure, okay, for the problems that they've created. And this is what I am talking about when I'm talking about the matrix, okay? I'm not talking about some weird, bizarre thing where we're living in a universe that doesn't exist, or some fucking matrix film thing where we're all in simulation bubbles and stuff like that. No, it's about disconnecting you from the reality that would have been right for you, okay? Because what we are basically living in is a zoo for human beings, but the zoo for the human beings that we're living in doesn't do anything that we're supposed to do within nature. If you go to a zoo, zoos are fucking miserable places anyway, awful places. But basically, what's happened is you enslave a species into something, create an artificial environment for them to sit in, and then you give them a diet that's kind of close to maybe or it's not even close to. Sometimes just satisfies the nutritional things so they don't die. But we're not thriving, and you'll notice if you go to a zoo, even the best zoo, they're not thriving. Those animals are not thriving. They're often not eating their natural diet. They're not in their natural climates. They're not in their natural environments. They're not doing natural behaviors because they're all living in a prison, in effect. And what we need to recognize is actually most human beings now are actually living in a prison that's been created for us, that is basically this kind of society that causes us to, be damaged in certain ways. Because what they do is they create the poison, they create the problem, they cause a reaction in you because they're aware of what your primordial senses are and who you are as an animal at first, because there's all parts of us. That part of us is like the human, and this is the higher part of ourselves, which I would say is primarily sort of in the prefrontal cortex. Then there's the animal part of ourselves that's still there, and this is that old root part of the brain, which makes sense really if you think about it, because which part of the brain would have been grown first. And we know that the root of the brain is the oldest part of the human brain because that was created first. And so from there, that root brain created like cerebellum and parts of the brain in the different hemispheres. And since then, as we have progressed from primates or Homo erectus of some form to where we are now, from Neanderthals to where we are now, what you'll find is that the brain has grown, and as the brain has grown, it's the outside of the brain that is the newer parts of the brain. And so as human beings have grown as a species, we've gained this level of consciousness, moving away further and further from the animal. And so the animal part of us is still very much part of us. We're still all animals, as you could probably see as a Friday night. Go out on a Friday night down anywhere where everybody's sitting in their lower base energies, doing their primal senses of wanting to fornicate, fearing that they're going to be left out and feeding on a kebab by the end of it. You'll see every single human being very much in their caveman, very much in their animal energy. And we all have it. But the beauty of flexing this prefrontal cortex part of our brain is that we can kind of move into that higher order thinking, the order thinking that's much more akin to the humanity that we could be. Some of those humanities and empires that we may have seen in the past, with some of those ideas about Atlantis there, and about these kind of higher utopian mythological or real, I don't know whether it was real or mythological. Some of you will want to say one way, some of you will want to say the other, but either way, it's an allegory for a utopian society that's been lost. Okay, and I feel like it got lost because we fell far too much into our primordial urges, and that's not our fault, because the societies that we live in keep you in a state of fear, keep you in a state of scarcity, keep you in a state of loss and worry, and so you are constantly triggered being in your lower brain. And the only way for you to not be triggered in your lower brain is to be aware of it, and is to become hyper-conscious of yourself, your behaviors, when your ego's stepping in, when you're having an issue that's triggering a core wound rather than actually being an issue, and when you're being manipulated, okay? Because the mainstream media is there to manipulate you. And if you don't think that's true, just go and have a look. Just go and have a look. Go and have a look at what the news of the day is. Have a think about what came through, what came true, whether any of the things that you've seen over the last however many years in the newspapers has even come true. Excuse me. And I think if you're not sure about that, look at Brexit and think about the amount of people that are now wishing that they hadn't voted for Brexit, whatever your kind of opinion is. But it's not been helpful to the UK. The reason why most people voted to go out, the people that voted out, was because they were massively manipulated by the media to tell them that there'd be more money for the NHS, that we're overrun with migrants, and that the world's going to go to hell. And you can see that the fear of rhetorics are created. So let's have a little look at the first primordial sense that I've got in my table here. And the primordial sense, number one, is fear. So the problem here is the thought and the worry about war, about violence, about tribal challenges. Remember that humans predominantly were tribalistic creatures, okay? And you'll see how this gets played out in a moment. But we are tribalistic creatures. Human beings are sociable animals, and they live in tribes. They live in pods, in groups, typically groups of about 50 to 100 people max. And you would have seen these anthropologically and historically sprigging up, that's not a word, sprouting up as little villages of little kind of, there would be families, that a family would live together, maybe wives and husbands, and you'd start to see little communities of about 100 people with children, which would all be for the good of that community. And this is what we've seen the deterioration of in our modern world, that is pretty deliberate. And I think the constantly using the tactics of divide and conquer, and I'll show you how they do that in a moment. So we would have typically lived in small villages. And so part of our animalistic pre-programming from our primordial days is that we need a tribe to survive, okay? And that a tribe with hierarchy, different roles being played, such as like nannies, wisdom, tribal elders, that they would have had a space for wisdom. The children would have probably been looked after as a community. There would have been very strong ties between the family. There would have been roles for the women, roles for the men. And this is very, very intrinsically built into it. So, as much as we want to get away from all this thing, like men can be women and women can be men and anybody can do anything they want to do, that's true. But we were also fighting hundreds and thousands of years of biological programming about what we are. Because we are animals, we are still that caveman somewhere in ourselves, and we that is part of us. And yes, no doubt we could go through a process of evolution even further, where maybe we could rid that part of ourselves, and we could get to a higher level of human species where we could create our utopian society where we're not having all this shit. However, to be able to do that requires you looking in the mirror and recognizing what the fuck is wrong with you and being the change that you need to be. Because the system isn't going to change first, okay? We are not going to fix this world by changing the system, because the system is triggering all of us to stay within the system. It's the poison, it's the cure, and it's trapping us. So the one thing that we really need to do is change ourselves to the point that we're no longer triggered by the system, which means that we can remove ourselves from these systems. Because you are not going to break the system, and they are not going to change the system. They made the system to work that way because it works for them and it keeps them in power. So waiting for your slave owner to decide, I shouldn't keep these slaves. This is bad, actually. I'm getting all my cotton picked, all my work done for me. I'm having all this money that's being made off killing other people. But, I just think that's a bit bad. The only reason why the shit gets changed is because we become better people. We be the change that we want to see in the world. And then we change ourselves enough to extricate ourselves from the system. So then there's enough of us to rebel and change the system. That's the only way that life is ever going to work. Okay? So when they tell you protesting doesn't work, just remember that it's been this year that they've made that something fucking basically illegal to protest. Yeah? Watch what they make illegal. Watch what they say you can't talk about, because that's often a very important key. So, primordial sense one, fear, okay? The problem is war, violence, and these tribal challenges, okay? So we may have had like issues with other tribes. There would have been a fight for resources. It could be that there was food that was scarce at points, and so you have to battle against another tribe. And also that whole thing about, people stealing women, stealing people's women, or coming in to take resources from the other tribe, or to try and take over other tribes. So tribal challenges would have been an issue. So the reaction that creates in with ourselves is that, that is not mine, that you're not one of us, okay? And creating anger and fear, us and them, thinking and divide and conquer mentalities. This is how I see it. I might be wrong. I mean, this is just what I've learned over my mad years. So we do this thing where, you know, we create divisions between us, and the solution to make you pour into this more, okay? So this is their solution. It's not the solution for us. This is their solution. It's the Matrix's solution, and the Matrix solution to this is to ensure that you keep staying within the reaction, feeling the problem, feeling the primordial sense, so they can poison you to sell you the cure, okay? So the solution that is offered for this is things like racism, nationalism, competition, sports, and this is perverted by the media to once again keep people in a state of fear. So the way that the media would do this, for instance, is talking about migrant crisis, or, you know, about the things that happened like after the Twin Towers with a lot of kind of Islamophobia that came out, and it was creating these two types of peoples, yeah? Because we're not any types of peoples, we're one peoples, that's it. There's one type of peoples on this planet. It's human peoples, you know? There's no races. There are no races. There's one race. We're human beings, okay? And everything else is a construct. It's bullshit that we've been sold and we've been told to make sure that we stay divided from our fellow man. Because a lot of people who all feel the same thing are awakened and have managed to kind of step outside of some of their egoic attachment. They're very powerful. And if there are many of us all together, this system would be destroyed. And the people who created the system to create and keep control for themselves, the whole thing would be destroyed. Oh, this is good. This is good. I've been meaning to make this video for ages. So I hope you're enjoying this. I'm loving this. Okay, if you're loving this, give me a thumbs up, give me a subscribe, leave me a comment. Let me know what your thoughts are. Do you think this is right? And yeah, share it with a friend if you're enjoying this. So the whole point is about keeping you in a state of fear with this primordial sense. So they know that that's something that they can trigger really easily in you. They create an issue that is like something that's happening. So at the moment, you know, we're being constantly triggered by the Ukraine war. Why do I call it the Ukraine? I don't know why I call it the Ukraine. I think I'm thinking like the USSR, and then I'm just like, it just begins with Ukraine. So like, yeah, it begins with a U. That's not a normal thing. I'm sorry, neurodivergent. Anyway, so the war in Ukraine, this is something that's being used at the moment to kind of like keep people triggered and in a state of fear. And none of it's like, for me, you can call me, you know, maybe you're just like, oh, you're just uninformed. But I'm not uninformed. I know this stuff is going on. But because I don't read the newspapers and I don't watch the news and I don't read like news really every day, because I know all of this stuff, like it's pantomime. A lot of it is pantomime, and it's pantomime being used to create fear and trigger stuff in you. And I'm not saying that it's all made up. But like a lot of the things, for instance, that we have been triggered and to be very fearful over actually really never happened and never came to fruition. So it's like, why are we staying in fear over things that we can't fix, we can't change, and our worrying and stuff won't help about it? And actually all this does is kind of disempower us. So it's not the kind of approach that I would like to take in my life. So yeah, Ukraine war is one of them. You know, the Cold War, for instance, was another of them. There was like this threat, this overwhelming threat that something's going to happen. And this has been like this for the last sort of 6 years. The last 6 years, they've really fucking ramped it up. And I think that's because right now the planet is going through an ascension cycle. It is going through a spiritual awakening collectively for all of us, if you want to think about the spirituality side of it. And so what's the best way to stop people waking up is to get them really fucking distracted. And the best way to distract them is something like a pandemic. And whether it's created or whatever, or it's just, you know, never let a good, what do they say? Never let a good disaster go to waste. They never let a good disaster go to waste. And I do feel like if there isn't one naturally, there will be one created. That's very conspiratorial, but that's how I feel. So this keeps people in a state of fear, and that state of fear is used to sell you stuff and create things in the matrix that keeps you triggered. So for instance, that idea of racism, where they decided to name all the people different things based on how much melanin they've got. That's it. That's insane. So yeah, they decided to start splitting all the human beings that there are into these pretend categories, and then that's one way that you can all be horrible about each other. And then things like nationalism. Once we've done that, we're splitting them down into countries, and then they can identify with that country. And then we're splitting them down into counties. Then we're splitting them down into cities, and then we're splitting them down into class. Yeah. So once they're in the city and they're all like, oh, I all come from Bath, but all the rich people in Bath don't like the poor people in Bath. And then we're like, they're not Bathonians, we're Bathonians. So I'm from Bath, by the way. So it keeps people in this kind of like weird feedback loop where they just can't get out of this stuff because they're being constantly triggered. They're being given a problem to keep that trigger. They're having a reaction, and then kind of like the solution from the matrix is to make sure that reaction keeps continuing and to exacerbate it. Okay, to exacerbate it. And they do it very, very well. So the next primordial sense, that was quite loud, sorry guys. I'm getting very excited. Calm down, Laura. Take a breath. I'm always worried I'm going to forget what I'm going to say and then I'll lose it. So I talk fast. Okay. There's a lot of frenetic energy here, guys. Sorry about this. Right. The next primordial sense is feed. One of the things that we would have experienced anthropologically and from a primordial state would be that famine was a very real thing. And famines have been going on. I mean, probably closest to us, we're in a bit of a food poverty situation now, but nothing like what an actual famine is. So count your blessings. But we should also be doing better. Even with like going back to the potato famine, so I don't know when that was. Is that 15th, 16th century, 17th century? I think it's either the 1500s or the 1700s. I don't know. Off the top of my head, I probably should know because my family are Irish on one side. Somebody enlighten me in the comments if you know. History is not my bag. So feed, okay. So the fear of famine is something that is in your genes, okay? And through epigenetic studies and kind of that side of things, genetics at the moment, they have seen, there's been studies that show that things that have happened in your genetic lineage, so therefore, grandparents, great-great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents, apparently the traumas of the one generation can stay up to 30 generations with a family lineage. So that would mean, like, for instance, if you could be like, say, if you've got like a binge eating issue and you've got you can't stop eating and food is something that you're very, very focused on in this lifetime, it could be that you had a great grandparent who had gone through the potato famine, for instance. And so, and this has been something, I'll try and find the studies and put it in the comment box or something. This has been something that has been studied. This is not my assumption. I'm just making shit up in my head. This is something that's been studied. And I think they said it was up to about 30 generations, which is an extraordinary amount of time. And if you think about the collective trauma that's been put on our genetic lineage, like, holy crap, you're not just dealing with what you feel, you're dealing with what everybody behind you for 30 generations felt and dealt with. This is why I do a lot of kind of ancestral work when I work with my clients, because it's like what your grandmother went through did affect you. But they're saying now it's not just your grandmother, it's like your great-great-grandmother, your great-great-grandpappy, like all the way back. So famine is something that's hard-rooted on all of us. And obviously, the solution that comes, the reaction that comes from that is that we want to eat everything. Because we are hardwired to want to seek sugar, to want to eat these foods. When we have high-fat, high-palatable foods, these would have been things like honey, okay, that we would have found in the wild. And so the body learned that if you find these highly palatable foods that are full of fat or full of sugar, you just gorge yourself and you gorge as much as you can. There's no stopping, okay? Because if you don't, when you're in a place where there's not a supermarket and resources are scarce, you eat after the kill, you eat after the find, because food goes off, food goes bad. And so this has created this primordial sense of us that we want to eat everything. And the way that the capitalist consumerist market has used your nature against you is by creating fast food, junk foods, and other types of products that prey on this primordial urge, making you addicted to food types for profit. Okay, you're going to hunt out that sugar, you're going to gorge of it. And so this consumerism, capitalism has done studies to create a food thing called the bliss point. And this bliss point is the perfect matching between a level of salt, fat, and sugar, which would have been three things that are typically scarce in the human diet. And so these three wonderful things, when culminated into the perfect flavor, makes it more addictive than cocaine. Okay, they did a study on this. They had a rat that was going towards the bliss point mix and a rat that was going towards the cocaine, and it chose the bliss point one. So the foods that you're eating, I'm sure that's right. I might have just mixed up two studies. That's quite Laura if that is it. But again, I'll try and find these studies that I've mentioned, and I will put any corrections if I've made any mistakes, because I'm just ranting. I'm a crazy lady ranting. I've got pink hair, for Christ's sake, guys. Come on. So that what they will do is using these studies of things, they've basically created food types that are addictive to you, and at the same time they're making you sick, because the motherfuckers want to sell you pharmaceuticals as well. So they give you foods that make you sick, that lower your vibration, and then they keep you sick. So they keep you then in the situation where you're reliant on them for the parent, because it's like as I said at the beginning, the real mother is Mother Earth. The false mother is the matrix, and the false matrix wants you to be reliant on it in the same way that you're reliant on Mother Earth. So, but this one, Mother Earth will save you. Mother Earth will keep you healthy. Mother Earth will look after you if you treat her right. The matrix won't. The matrix has no desire to look after you. It wants to keep you subservient. That's it. That's it. Because you are then part of the machine. You're part of the machine of capitalism. And you're somebody that is just constantly a customer. They want to keep you a customer forever. That's it. For life. Because then you can slave and you work and you buy. And you slave and you work and you buy. And whilst you're slaving and working and buying, all that money, all that energy, all that labor is being siphoned off to the top to make sure that some people don't have to slave or work or buy. They just enjoy. We're still in an apartheid. Just they outsource slavery to all of us now. That's it. We're all slaves. That's shit, isn't it? We'll get there, hopefully. So all you can do is keep being your best self. That's all you can do. So the consumerist answers, you'll find chocolate, you'll find sweets, you'll find fast food everywhere. You know, when I was a kid, you just go in the clothes shop and they'd just be closed. Now you're going to clothes shop with sweets and all sorts. You can't get away from it. So they create an addiction in you. They create the poison. They create the cure. That's what they've done. And they're using these things. They're using your own nature against you. I really hope you can see this. I hope this makes sense to you. Okay, our next primordial sense is fornication, okay? So our next sense is fornication, which means that we are wanting to fornicate, we want to procreate, okay? Which means that we have some sort of mental leaning towards being our best, okay? Now, I know that alpha studies within chimpanzees and primates and humans say that we don't have a hierarchical structure such as alpha, etc., naturally. And I would believe that would be natural to humans if we hadn't have been tampered with and put into this false matrix that triggers this thing that kind of creates an egoic attachment to being the best. Because this, again, is something that kind of comes from, sorry, guys, this is also something that kind of comes from capitalism, you know, that if you create a hierarchical structure, you can, again, keep people separated because it's like the poor people, the people at the bottom, the people at the top. So it's always about keeping a structure in place that triggers this thing of I'm not enough. So fornication, you want to procreate, you want to be loved, you want to be desired, you want to have a partner, okay? And with that comes some fear for all of us about not being the alpha, but obviously not necessarily in that structure. I've just used that term. I could probably change that because it might be a bit confusing. But you're not being your best, okay? So that's that. You're not being your best. And if you're not your best, then you won't be desirable, and then you'll not be able to procreate. So it comes up with these things. I'm not good enough. I need to be, insert, you know, whatever your hang up is, prettier, thinner, funnier, handsomer, more muscly, whatever it is that you feel. And these often tend to come in with biological markers, I would say, that about attractiveness that is to do with healthiness, and all to do with that kind of, I'm looking for a healthy mate. And so you're looking with somebody who is far enough away in the gene pool from you that it would be create a healthy baby, and that looks like they are healthy. If they don't look healthy, you won't want to procreate with them. This is why naturally, people who have lots of acne or something, there's a kind of a primordial urge in us that's not attractive, because from the monkey part of ourselves, from the chimpanzee part of ourselves, from the caveman part of ourselves, a very primordial self, is just that fear of that thing may be contagious. And we as human beings in a higher sense of ourselves are aware that that's not a thing, and we can override that part of ourselves. You can only override that part of yourself if you're conscious of it. So this is probably why you'll see so much more bullying that happens in high school, because hopefully by most of the time people have been through high school, their prefrontal cortex has been growing during that period of being a teenager, and the prefrontal cortex is finally grown around 23. So you can see you've got a good long time there to actually get this sense of self that's more mature and higher, more considerate, and more kind of like of the kind of utopian idea of what a human being could be, rather than being this horrible, animalistic, nasty bully, kind of that just see things and say things and reacts and that kind of thing. So yeah, it triggers off all these feelings. And of course, society does all it can to make sure that feeling is triggered consistently. And so it creates things like makeups and diets and fashion, pills and potions that offer you an immediate solution, things like Instagram and Facebook and comparison of each other. So beauty pageants, all the things that have been created to just keep you triggered all the time. It's amazing. And and this just creates this misery, and comparison is the thief of joy. So we create this competition between each other. We create this whole thing about hierarchies and about ideas that kind of feed back into, again, this tribalism, where classism or nationalism or whatever, where we identify to something and then we become so attached to it. And then that kind of it just keeps feeding into everything. I hope that makes sense. I've lost what I was going to say there. So, and the very last one is flee. Okay, so we have this primordial sense of self that when we get stressed, we want to fly away. We want to run away. We want to abdicate. We want to get away. And so we have things like stressful situations, and we have problems that are often created by some of the stuff that's societal. So for instance, working for somebody rather than being in a barter process, or being in a job role where there's 150 people that want your job, and there's no kind of community or kind of cohesion between us all, where we're a community working together. It's very dog eat dog. And then we have relationship issues that are obviously natural. It's not created by the Matrix. But maybe the expectations of our partners are certainly created by the Matrix. What we view a relationship as is very much created by the Matrix. Basically every idea that you probably have had in your brain that you haven't challenged is one that you were given when you were a child. What do you think a marriage looks like? What are relationships for? Is monogamy better than polygamy? You start to ask yourself some of the questions that you have deeply held stuff on, and you'll often find, where the hell did I even get that idea from? And if it wasn't from your parents, it would have been from the programming you received when you were a child. And that depends on what school you went to, what education you went to, what class system you're in, so on and so forth. All of these things come with their own connotations about creating a bubble to keep you divided from your fellow man, by creating brainwashing and assumptions towards people by categorizing them. And recently, the identity politics has gone fucking insane. And it's all about keeping you divided. So when you're starting identifying with this, that, or the other, just recognize all you're doing is creating more coats for your ego that you have to take off at some point. I like that. Coats for your ego. Anyway, so flee. You'll have a stressful situation, something to do with your boss, something to do with your spouse, some sort of issue like that. and you'll feel this feeling of I'm going to be abandoned, I'm going to be rejected. And this is like a really big issue for us all, because if we've been kind of like thrown out the tribe, particularly as women, we probably would have been eaten or raped. So, I say particularly as women because we are the child bearers. And so at some point in our lives, part of our system would have been to have the children, and you are incapacitated. You're incapacitated when you are pregnant. And so you require a strong community, a strong spouse, a strong person around you, man with you, to procreate, to ensure that, that you'll be safe, because you can't flee. Okay. As a pregnant lady. So that is something that's part of all women. It's part of you. So that's part of being a female. You can't get rid of it. You can't get away from that. So, it's like you can't just be a floating brain. You have to recognize you're also a human being. I think this is that intellectual bypass shit that we're doing now. I've done it with spirituality. But a spiritual bypass or an intellectual bypass with some of my trauma and pain, where I just wanted to do it in the head. I'll just do it in the head. Now I'm just going to do it in the head. But it's like, did you do it in your body? Like, you got to do it in your body too. So we can't intellectually bypass this stuff. Is any of this even making sense, Laura? Are you even speaking English anymore? So there's a feeling I'm going to be abandoned. I'm going to be rejected. This triggers off the flee response in us. And so what did they create? Holidays, gap years. Can you believe this stuff, guys? It's like, it might just be me doing that like backwards viewing thing where you can create a link for anything. I'm happy to admit that I've probably got Dunning-Kruger. I'm not as smart as I think I am. But I look at this and I'm like, hey, that makes so much sense. So it could be that your flee has been triggered from a stressful response, and then it triggers off this deeply held wound of I'm going to be abandoned and rejected, which triggers that wound, that worry about the, being a tribal person without your tribe means probable death. If you ever look at like a buffalo herd, they always huddle together when they're being chased because. And what they'll do, like by lions or something, I don't know, they're not lions and buffaloes, I don't know. But what they'll do is they'll circle them and they'll push, and the whole pod of buffaloes will come together, because when there's many of us, it's very difficult to pick out one. And that's why I say, remember, guys, protest is pretty good. There's a lot of us. But when you push them, what they'll do is the lions will chase them or whatever. They'll chase them until they get to a point where the oldest or the youngest would start to fall behind from the whole group. And then it's that one that's getting left behind that gets picked off. So this idea that I'm going to be without my community, I'll be the one on the outside of the tribe, triggers a very, very deeply held wound of certain death. That being abandoned means death. And that's why so many of us have got so many like really deep abandonment issues, because it's also something that we hold in this life very strongly as well. When you're born and you're a baby, you're entirely reliant on your parents for everything. So being rejected or abandoned as a baby, which is something we've all physically been through and is all in our genetical lineage for every single human being that's ever been born. So how strong do you think that core wound would be? That feeling of I'm going to be abandoned, I'm going to be rejected is triggered for in all of us at some point as children in this lifetime, but it means that that's something that's so hardwired in us. And so what did they create? Holidays. They created gap years where you escaped your life, that you could flee from this stressful situation. The abandonment one, I think they didn't really create a solution here. That's not a solution down here, because obviously that's just fleeing from fleeing from the problem. But to remedy things like I'm going to be abandoned, I'm going to be rejected, again feeds back into the fornication stuff of making it you're not enough, and so making you go towards these things. So you start to see that a lot of these situations kind of fall back into other things as well. The fear response, people do running away. They flee and so they run away. The fornication, they may fall into doing like things where they work from the subconscious and they make themselves, they just eat and stuff and they gorge on something else to make themselves feel better and just go away from this. There's a lot of kind of ways that your ego can get trapped, can grab you and trap you in this stuff to keep you just residing in these parts of the world that are not created for you, I don't know what the hell I've been saying. I've never talked about this. I've written down about 46 minutes. Okay, I should stop talking. Anyway, this is something I wrote in my book. I've never talked about it. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope some of this made sense. Leave me a comment below if you like this and tell me what your thoughts are. I've just literally been rambling at you for 45 minutes. I love you. Be good. Take care. Bye.